Hello everyone, this is Learn English with Brandon, and in this video I want to talk to you about racism. Um, Racism in the United States is a controversial subject, and if you run into Americans inside or outside of my country, you should be careful about bringing up this subject. Some people are very, very sensitive about this subject, and in my experience, what I find is that it's generally the average white American male who tend to be very sensitive about this subject. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that. I would like to talk about first the history of Africans in the United States, and then I would like to move forward in time to modern times and how things are functioning now, or the way that I see things functioning now. Okay, for I guess you could say for thousands of years, Africans have been exploited for their labor inside of Africa. I'm saying thousands of years, and this is an assumption. I can't go that far back in history. However, with take for instance the Dutch. The Dutch were colonizing various tribes in Central Africa to farm rubber. We've been exploiting that continent for gold, for rubber, for diamonds, for many, many years. For minerals, anything that we can discover. The continent is huge, and it has probably just about any resource that we can think of. So, with the United States in particular, we started buying and kidnapping slaves, particularly from Liberia, modern day Liberia. Where Africa kind of has that curve to it, right in that curved section. Liberia, we were trading firearms for slaves. Certain tribes were kidnapping members of other tribes and trading them for firearms. So it wasn't that the white men were just going to Africa and just grabbing people and taking them. I mean, they were doing business with other people. So this is it's part of the complicated history to it. There's no moral high ground on either side, and we'll get further onto that as well. Okay, so in the 1700s, around the time that the Constitution of the United States was being written, around the time of independence, 1776, the people who wrote the Constitution, Thomas Jefferson, all of these people, they were slave owners. They all owned slaves, and these slaves were farming cotton. They were farming hemp. They were doing basically all of the work for everybody under the harshest conditions, and they truly were not treated like humans. If you can imagine what it would be like for a woman to watch her baby being fed to alligators for bait to catch alligators, this is incredibly dark, and I can't think of anything darker in history. We don't talk about these things in education or in the United States, okay? Especially when we talk about the Civil War. And if you know anything about the Civil War, perhaps you've been told that the Civil War was fought over slavery. I think that this is a very romantic idea, that the Civil War was fought over slavery, that there was the good side and the bad side, and certain people wanted to control slaves and the other people wanted to liberate the slaves, so therefore there was a war. This is not the case. This is not the case at all, and I'll give you an example afterwards on why. But the Civil War, I think a stronger argument for why the Civil War actually happened was because it was a battle between states having power or the federal government having power. The original notion of the United States was that they were independent bodies, but they would unite for war in case they needed to defend themselves against another nation, such as Britain or whatever. So I really don't believe that the Civil War was specifically about slavery. Historically, the North, which won, they would find black people and convince them to fight for their freedom, and they would send them into war, into the battlefield's front lines without any firearms. So basically, they were just sending them to their death so that the other guys would have a better chance, so that the white men would have a better chance in winning the battles. Okay, so eventually the Civil War was fought, it was over, the South had lost, the federal government had its power, slaves were freed. But what happened after this? What happened after this? They wrote laws in the they started writing laws so that if you were a criminal, you lost the right to vote, and were arrested. Black people were arrested for the smallest of crimes, perhaps whistling at a lady, or I mean, just about any absurd thing that you can imagine. So when slavery was illegal, that meant you couldn't take somebody and make them work for you. But if you were in jail, you could work, and you could be controlled by an institution, and you would have to work for free. So so, when right after the Civil War, when African Americans were arrested or convicted of a crime, they lost their right to vote, and they were then put into prison where they had to work. So I want you to think about all the damage that happened during the Civil War. It was a very bloody war, violent war, but I want you to think about all the damage that happened, okay? Now, how did that damage get fixed? Well, it was fixed or repaired by the African Americans, okay? African Americans rebuilt the United States after the Civil War. And it was a process that happened legally as a result of allowing or making it a law that you can be put to work if you committed a crime, and this still exists today. So African Americans didn't have the right to vote if they were a criminal. Women at this point didn't have a right to vote, so that leaves out all African American females. And if you did commit a crime and you were in jail, you would be subject to labor camps. And if you watch various videos, "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" It's a very commercial video with George Clooney, but this kind of gives you a little bit of a depiction on that, because that is what happened. African Americans rebuilt the United States after the Civil War. So it's not this romantic idea that the Civil War was fought, slavery disappeared, and everything was better. Far from the case. Far from the case. Now let's jump ahead in time. Let's jump ahead in time. Okay, specifically in the 1960s. The 1960s, we had a lot of movements in the United States. The women's rights movement, the African American rights movement, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, all of these influential people, and even homosexuals had their movements to gain more liberties and to have equal access to the things that people like me typically have access to without having to question it. So they wanted the same privilege that people like me typically have. Okay? And that's what they were fighting for. And if you look at political legislation that was done with Nixon, done with Reagan, you can see how it kind of fought against that. And we've had this war on crime concept for a long period of time that was really intended just to put people in prison. Just to put people in prison. And to this day, if you are still in prison, you can be subjected to work for very low wages, and you lose your right to vote. So, this basically keeps African Americans in the position, or closer to the position, that they were in many, many, many years ago. Okay? But if you grow up in a suburb, say I was born in a suburb of a small town with all white people, and I watch television and I see African Americans on TV, like Bill Cosby, where they have a wonderful family, I might think, well, geez, it's all over. Slavery is over. Everybody is equal. I'm not racist, so how could anybody else be racist? Like, I'm not racist, so racism doesn't exist. I'm not hungry, so how could anybody in the world be starving? And if I have ice in my glass, then how could global warming even be real? Right? So we have like this very simple, limited mentality sometimes about these subjects, And it's basically just a result of not thinking honestly about these subjects. It was in the 1930s that the United States passed the Federal Housing Act. And this was around the time where the United States was transitioning from a blue-collar society into a white-collar society. And when this happened, it basically moved white people out of the cities, and it left African Americans and minorities, ethnic minorities, in the city, in the inner cities. And what happens when you move people like this outside of the city, they take their tax dollars with them. So when they take their tax dollars with them, the schools in the inner cities lose their quality. They don't have the funding to support their infrastructure. And of course, this eventually leads to more crime, because as the economy gets more and more difficult, as it goes down, crime goes up. And this is true all over the world. Why? Because people are struggling. When people are hungry, when people are starving, we often say that there are no rules. When people are hungry, there are no rules. And this is human nature. This is human nature. So this is a brief introduction to some of the complex issues concerning race relations within the United States. We had Malcolm X, who was killed, who was murdered. We had Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Both of these people were murdered. It is documented that the CIA was trying to get Martin Luther King to kill himself, and they were trying to blackmail him into that situation. Actually, it was Snowden that was quoting WikiLeaks. That's where I'm getting my source from on that. So let's move ahead now. Let's just jump ahead. I want to talk about Bill Clinton actually for a little bit right now, with Hillary Clinton actually referring to African Americans as super predators. They defunded welfare, and that basically took a lot of African American families off of welfare who existed in these cities. Crime went up in these cities, and then she starts referring to African Americans as super predators. That's what she said exactly. They are super predators. Now, regardless of what's happening in reality, when a white woman comes out and says they are super predators, how does that change the mentality of the way people look at African Americans, namely people who look like me, right? It's not good. Okay, now let's fast forward up to Obama, because this is the number one thing that you're thinking. But you have a black president. How can people be racist? You have a black president. Yes, we did have an African American president. However, look at what he was able to do in Congress. Virtually nothing. They worked against him in just about every way possible. But I'm going to tell you one thing that I noticed specifically from my point of view within my country. And that's that having a black president in my country brought to surface a lot of the racism that you wouldn't have seen to begin with. Okay? This is a little scary. But when Bush was in office, when Clinton was in office, I didn't really hear the N-word that much. But when Obama was in office, I heard the N-word. And for those of you who don't know what the N-word is, I'm not going to say it because we don't say that in the United States. And some people in other countries might find it funny, but you need to understand that this is the worst word. It is a word that means nothing but hate. So we don't say that word. We don't say that word. If you hear African Americans saying that word, that is their business. But we do not say that word. We do not say that word. Ever. And if you don't know what word I'm referring to, good for you. Okay? So Obama really seemed to, just his presence in government seemed to surface the racism that actually exists. And for me, it was incredible. I was living in Ecuador. I lived in the United States shortly after that, and then I had lived in Canada for a while. And then when I got back to back to the United States. It was a night and day difference in terms of how people were talking about African Americans. And I was in the capital of New York, and I witnessed a lot of racism. I didn't experience any racism myself, obviously. But I did witness a lot of racism towards a lot of different minorities. So, I want people to be aware that racism does exist in the United States, and perhaps as education gets better, it is going away, but it is by far from gone. It is by far from gone, and there are many forces that work against the equality in the United States system. There are many forces that work against equality, just as there are in many countries. Now, I'm from the United States, and I believe that in order to be a true patriot, you have to be critical of your country. Now, there are other countries that some things are definitely worse in, but I'm not here to critique them because I'm from the United States and I feel like I have a job to do. I feel like it's my duty. And I feel like it's my duty as an English teacher to use these discussions and to use these topics to fuel your thought in English so that you can talk about these. And that's so we can further collaborate on our ideas and shape our ideas so that we can become more organized, more collaborative, and more egalitarian across the globe. Okay? So I do hope you agree with most of the things that I'm saying. If you don't agree, please comment below. Let's start a dialogue over this. It's a great way to practice your English because we can talk about things that are real, things that you might be passionate about, things that I am trying to express my passion about. And if you like it, thumbs up, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.